Today we have the world's foremost Broadmoor researcher. And if you're not familiar with Broadmoor, it is a secure hospital for the criminally insane. A huge part of the Broadmoor story is the Jimmy Savile saga, whereby Savile was running the place at one point. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So many dark and diabolical characters were incarcerated in this mental facility, but even darker and more diabolical characters like Savile had access to them. So Boris is gonna run down his research. He's got a book coming out called Broadmoor Sinister, and that's coming out on April the 2nd of 2022.
Yes. Yeah.
And all of the links will be in the description box below the video for Boris and his book. This interview is kindly arranged by Christopher Berry D, so all of his links will also be below this video. He's a prolific true crime author and specializing in serial killers. And many of you have seen the videos we've done with him on the channel. I'll put the links to them down there as well. Huge thank you for coming on, Boris.
No problem, Shaun.
Yeah.
Pleased to be here.
Before we get into Savile and all this other stuff, what got you interested in researching Broadmoor?
Well, it goes back to about 1977. I was 9 years old and I had a extremely bad incident at Broadmoor Hospital, and it just engaged me. It was in the newspapers the next day, and it gripped me. And just as time gone on, Monday morning here and the Broadmoor practice siren goes off, it just grips you. And the horror stories that come out of the hospital, it's just something I've always been fascinated with. It's taken me over, and big time.
Do you remember what those early horror stories were that were fascinating you?
Yeah, it's a guy called Robert Maudsley who was incarcerated in Broadmoor Hospital. An incident happened in 1978 where he committed a murder in London. He was placed into the hospital, and on one incident in Broadmoor Hospital, him and another guy called Cheeseman held another patient hostage for 9 hours in one of the rooms that were in there. For these 9 hours, they tortured this other patient. Who, not just tortured him, I mean, they tied his hands up with flex that was available in the room. They physically tortured him. They kicked his head like a football. And the outcome was that Robert Maudsley had a plastic spoon which he formed into a sharp object and stabbed it into the side of the ear, killing the guy pretty much instantly. There was a rumour going around that what he actually done was he took the head off this guy and started eating the brains, which has since been found not been true. It was just a plastic spoon, but that's the story that gripped me. That's reading it the next day in the papers when they gave him a nickname of Hannibal the Cannibal. We're going back to 1977, before any film came out. This is the original Hannibal the Cannibal, and that moniker stuck with him, since today. And then there's other stories where a friend of mine, his mum worked there, she was attacked, and you get all these stories build up, and over the years, and you just take it into the type of people that are actually inside the hospital. Fascinating.
Wow. All right, so a huge part of your book, Broadmoor Sinister, is the Savile story, and you went and researched his entire family upbringing, did you?
Yeah.
Because he had a strange medical situation whereby his eyes wouldn't close, didn't he?
Yeah,
and he was like the miracle child that he exists. He didn't die.
They say. I mean, his brother, he had a brother called John and another brother called Vincent, and as they grew older, they told the stories that he was a gifted child. This is why him and his mum, who we called the Duchess, were very close, Agnes. It was about 3-month-old that he actually, or 4-month-old, that he was actually being pushed in a buggy, and he fell out the buggy, causing substantial injuries, which resulted in Savile being placed into a hospital for 3 months. They actually thought they were going to lose him. And as time gone on, he was the sort of dream child of all the brothers and all the sisters. he was the one that they all sort of rallied round. You know, he was that type of special kid to them.
And how do you think that played into his psychology then? His feelings of, invincibility and superiority. Do you think that anchors back to his miraculous survival of his illness?
I think it probably anchors back to, if you've got that child that everyone rallies round, it makes you feel special.
Yeah.
So then you can start playing the game of pitting one off against the other. That's just where I think that half the trouble, if he wants something, if someone wasn't going to go give it to him, he'd ask somebody else. He didn't pit his parents off against each other because he didn't have really much to do with his father. I mean, his father died in, I think it was 1955. He was an insurance salesman. He just went out to work and come back. It was his mother and his siblings. But he paired them off against each other.
What was it like for him growing up? Wasn't there a lot of mining activity in that region? And didn't he eventually become a miner?
Yeah, he became what they're known as a Bevan boy, which means he couldn't fight in the Second World War, so he was conscripted down to the mines at an early age. That didn't last very long because he actually had an accident down in the mines. It was an explosion that rendered his back useless. That didn't last very long at all. I mean, he claims to be, you probably see him at the cenotaph later in life, with the Bevan boys and on the Remembrance Sunday. But that was a very short period of his life. That wasn't something to be, brag about extensively. I mean, you're literally a couple of months down the mine.
So was that part of his myth and his legend? It came from such humble roots.
Yeah, he used that quite a lot with people. I mean, he played on the downtrodden bit. My mum's hardworking. She had to bring up 7 kids. My father went out to work hard to support the family. Well, in fact, he was an insurance broker, but he was also a bookmaker as well. So, of course, in them times, off-street bookmakers wasn't the dumb thing. He spent a lot of time with his brother Vincent and a lot of time with his brother John. And Vincent was to become a killer later in life.
A killer?
No, a key to help him.
Oh, a key.
No, not a killer. Well, I don't know. He could have done. No, Vincent, he was, after Savile sort of left the mining industry and recuperated. What happened then was that his brother Vincent got Jimmy into nightclubs, being a disc jockey.
So that's how he got into nightclubs. Yeah. It was through his brother.
Yeah.
Right.
His brother's the key to a lot of things. Not a lot of people know, but Vincent was a bit of a villain.
Was he?
Yes. He was well known in the underworld scene. He had money. He had power. Which I think is what Jimmy Savile played on.
What kind of rackets would his brother have been doing back then?
Cigarette rackets, booze rackets. The nightclub game would have been one of them as well, because you can hide a lot behind the nightclub. I mean, it's Manchester. You're talking the 50s, early 50s, up to the 60s. I mean, that's the time when, you sell booze and fags, and just after the war, everyone's in want.
All right, so he gets this nightclub job then. Now, in the Louis Theroux program, he talks about a situation in a nightclub.
Yeah. And
he kind of reveals that he had some guy tied up in the basement, I think it was. Are you able to expand on that?
I am. I mean, I put it down to Jimmy using his brother's Vincent's know-how, because all Jimmy was in the club at the time was a DJ. He was spinning records. He was the first one to get people up dancing to records. He was, and what made him popular was he drew the crowds in. Then, just as that started, what his brother suggested was, run nightclubs. So he got Jimmy into running 3 nightclubs in the Manchester area. Now, Jimmy said this is a bit of a power trip, because his attitude was, you come into my club, you behave. You don't behave. He was known to take him downstairs, he'd tie him up, and they would get a good beating, I mean, he played on the fear. I mean, his brother Vincent is the one that everyone was feared of. So Jimmy used it. You know what I mean? He used that to his advantage. He never let on in later life, asked my brother. It was Vincent is the key to everything.
And then what work was he doing at Leeds General Hospital?
There was a guy called Franey, who was a good friend of Jimmy Savile's, who was in charge of Leeds General Hospital. And what Franey done was, Jimmy, you know, got involved with Franey, and what eventually happened was that he made his way to Leeds Hospital, put himself forward for volunteering as a porter. Now, the first early recorded case that Savile was involved in was in 1955, just before he went to Leeds General Hospital. So he's in the Leeds General, he's put himself forward for this porter's role. He's then not only doing the porter's role, he's doing the radio at the hospital as well. So he's getting himself well known in two different areas there. He's making himself out to be something. You know, he's trying, he's spreading the word, and then it becomes tricky. You know what I mean? This is where in 1957 they say that some of the Leeds General Hospital stuff started, where mortuaries were visited.
Did he have access to corpses at this point?
Yeah. It was known to have access to corpses. It is known that he had necrophilia. You know what I mean? He did dabble on that.
So the allegations of the necrophilia going back to the Leeds General Hospital period.
Yeah, it's not just Leeds. There are many other hospitals at a later date, but Leeds General seems to be the one. Him and Franey had a very good partnership, which will come to light later on. But Franey is another influence in his life.
What do you think made him have this fetish for corpses?
I'm no expert.
Yeah.
I could not tell you that. I mean, is it a power trip? You know, somebody's dead, they're on a slab. You know what I mean? I don't know if Christopher could describe it. If you know, if someone was, I'm here, you're not, I'm going to take, you know what I mean? I can't understand what made him go through that phase of life. To me, to the day I die, I wouldn't be able to work it out.
It's beyond people's comprehension, isn't it? Because it's so bizarre. So how did he get his lucky break then?
His lucky break came in the 60s. There was a radio station called Radio Luxembourg, which probably a lot of people would have heard of. He was picked up for Radio Luxembourg, and that's where he got his lucky break. He had hundreds of thousands of listeners all over Europe, very popular radio slots in the evening. And that took him for a number of years, and eventually the BBC got wind, and that's how he got the Radio 1 job. He spent many years at Luxembourg, BBC. You know, they pulled him in.
Did his track record of deviant behaviour, were the BBC aware of allegations against him in the early part of his life? And did they just override that because they saw him as this massive profit potential?
No, I mean, at first, no one knew. I mean, he was arrested in around about 1955 on suspected 2 cases of sexual abuse to 2 young ladies. That was, he was arrested, he was questioned, and the police put down no further action. That wasn't disclosed, and his brother Vincent, they believe, had something to do with him getting off of that particular charge. But the BBC didn't have no wind of it, no wind at all. I mean, nobody, even to the day he died, you know, people from the outside never knew.
Did you hear anything about the sexual abuse of a boy in Cheshire in the early period of his life?
Yeah.
Do you have any details about that?
Not too many on those. I mean, I'm going to be really honest with you. yet again, he pulled the wool over people's eyes on that one. You know, he got away with it. It was said there was money involved somewhere along the line. I believe that could be the case, but then again, I believe that could be down to his brother pulling strings.
What role did his weekly luncheon for the police play in him being able to get away with more and more things?
Power. I mean, with the police, you have got a situation where they are got to be 100% that they are going to get a conviction with this guy. Whether it's a CPS or the police, they've got to be 100%, because if it goes to court and he's found not guilty, the people that's brought the charges are going to look stupid. Their careers are going to go down the pan. But this guy's got power and money. He's a money-making machine. He's Jimmy Savile. He is the person you hear on the radio. It can't be Jimmy. He's too innocent. You know what I mean? It's the same as Rolf Harris. It couldn't be him. He's too innocent. He pulled the wool over the police's eyes. He pulled the wool over politicians' eyes. Big time. I mean, you're talking from 1950 to 1950, say, to 1998. Jimmy Savile was a sexual predator. And no one picked up on it.
What about the allegations that the police who attended his lunches, Jimmy Savile had access to so many teenage girls who were kind of groupie category back then, that he was supplying these girls to the cops who were attending his lunches?
Okay, with
they disappear into rooms in his house with these girls.
Yeah, I mean, if you read it, I mean, Jimmy Savile had a few nephews and nieces, and one of his nephews turned up at Jimmy's house one day, and it was noted by him that there was other young boys and girls there of a minor age, and there were people in high power places that were actually there at the time. He managed somehow to be ushered out, and he has said on camera that he knew back in the 50s and 60s that he was a sexual predator. He was grooming young girls and boys far back then. With the police, it's the same as the excuse me, the woman who was in the 80s who had the whorehouse.
In America?
No, it was over here. There's a film about a personal services was the name of the film. And she had the police and everyone in their backhand because the police were at it as well. So you don't know if there were officers there that were at it. Obviously, because he was supplying. Money talks. Jimmy's big. There's power. We can gain access to anything we want. It could be drugs. It just snowballs. It snowballs.
Is Duncroft Schoolgirl still open, James? Or is that closed?
Closed.
Is it?
In Staines.
So for the people watching that then, Duncroft Schoolgirls was it was in Surrey, in this county, wasn't it? And what kind of girls ended up there, and what happened to the runaways?
The type of girls that ended up there will be the ones that ended up in court with orders. You know, we're taking away from your parents. You're not going to school. You're bunking. You're shoplifting. You're doing whatever. So this was what I would say is the equivalent of a male-approved school. They were placed there for a reason, for education. Jimmy and his brother John claimed that girls were sending Jimmy letters, fan letters. This is what seems to be some sort of rules that he used. So he wrote to the headmistress at the time, said to her, "Look, I'm getting letters from girls. Would you like me to come and visit?" That was his in. Then he's in the situation of he's got a sweet shop to play in. This is, I'll put it bluntly, this is what, it is to Jimmy. It's a sweet shop. I've got all this to play with. It wasn't until later, around about 2011, that the two of them actually come forward and claimed that he raped them. His brother did as well. So there was about 7 or 8 cases. But at the time, it was brushed under the carpet because you bear in mind, you've got someone at an approved school that's gone out and committed theft. Then you've got Jimmy, who's a public figure, spins records for a living, is on telly. Who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe someone is in the wrong? Or are you going to believe Jimmy, who's buttered up to be some kind of demigod?
And apparently, if a complaint came in about him across the country, it was reported to his home jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And there was one cop in charge of receiving those incoming complaints. And that was a cop that attended his weekly lunches.
Yeah. Yeah, you could not make this up. I mean, Jimmy, from the start, he had everyone eating out of his hand. He was literally, I probably guarantee you, Shaun, that if he was sitting in front of you, you could be taken in by him. You know, you're talking about a man that was knighted by the Pope, that had a KGB. He even had the status of being an honorary admiral for the Navy. He had a green beret from the Royal Marines. This is the extent of this guy put himself out there. You're not going to argue with someone who's that way, you know what I mean? And it's money talks. I mean, I do believe that it was money that talked with that police officer, because you've got to bear in mind, them particular times, backhanders. We've all seen the TV programs. We all know the stories about the backhanders to people in the Met Police, Savile Police, sorry, in Amsterdam. You name it. It's backhanders. So it was that culture at the time. It's money.
And he was friends with Thatcher, he was friends with Prince Charles, and on it went, didn't it? So what was the relationship between Savile and the Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe?
Okay. Now, this is probably a bit of a long-winded story, but I'm going to start.
Please take your time, we've got all the time in the
Savile
world.
lived in Leeds in Roundhay Park in Leeds. He lived in a flat, which was about 4 or 5 stories up. Quite sparse for someone who's got that much money. It overlooked Roundhay Park. There were 2 Yorkshire Ripper murders in Roundhay Park, a matter of 150 yards from Savile's flat. Now, some would say that Savile had a relationship with Peter Sutcliffe well before Sutcliffe was arrested. It might it doesn't surprise me. Savile could be out eating lunch. You know, you've got to imagine Peter Sutcliffe could be in the same area. Savile was arrested on suspicion of one of these murders. They take dental records. Nothing's more said. Done and dusted.
Wow.
Then, I think it was about 1981 that Sutcliffe was arrested. And about 82, I think, or 83, he was placed into Broadmoor. And at the time, Savile was quite prolific in Broadmoor. He was quite well known. He don't keys. He's come and go as he pleases. Raises allegedly hundreds of thousands of pounds of Broadmoor, but that's neither here nor there. He strikes up a relationship with Peter Sutcliffe. And it's a very close relationship. These two get on like a house on fire. Not only do they get on like a house on fire, Savile, being the person he is, decides we're going to use this as a photo opportunity. Draws in Frank Bruno. So you've got a picture of Savile with his smoke-rimmed glasses, his customary cigar in the background of his shell suit, shaking hands in the foreground. You have Frank Bruno and the Yorkshire Ripper shaking hands. He had this type of power in the hospital. He drew in Prince Charles to raise funds. He drew in Princess Diana. He also drew in some of his sexual predator mates into the hospital as well. Rolf Harris had visited, guided tour with Jimmy Savile. Max Clifford, guided tour with Jimmy Savile. But what sticks in the throat of people is the relationship between him and the Yorkshire Ripper. I have many a times received messages from ex-patients at Broadmoor, ex-staff at Broadmoor who I'm still in touch with. They tell me the stories about he'd be walking round with Savile. They were sitting having a cup of tea. Savile would turn around, bring in stuff for Peter Sutcliffe. It's horrific to think that Savile had that much power. Everyone suspected what was going on, this relationship, but nobody pulled him up on it.
Mind-blowing. What access to corpses did he have around this period of time, and what do you suspect he got up to with those corpses?
I'm going to put it bluntly. I mean, if you've got the keys to a hospital, Broadmoor's got a mortuary for the obvious reasons, because the odd patient is probably going to die through the night, or there's going to be a suicide, or a patient's going to kill a patient, which has happened throughout the past. So you're going to have these mortuaries. Savile had total run of Broadmoor Hospital. He had a house on the just outside the walls. He had his own caravan inside the walls. He could come and go as he pleased. What went on in those mortuaries, I probably can only leave to the imagination of people that read horror stories. But then you've got Leeds General, Papworth Hospital, Stoke Mandeville Hospital, where he had his own room, and he called it the kennel. He had the run of the whole hospital. Oh, here's Jimmy, you know what I mean? Oh, don't worry about it, it's Jimmy, just let him get on with it. So you can only imagine what horrors went on in the mortuaries. That it's frightening.
It's one thing to assume that he conned Prince Charles into helping him and Princess Di into helping him, and on it goes. But why on earth would the royal family bring Jimmy Savile in as a marriage guidance counsellor for Princess Di and Charles? Wouldn't you have to have security clearance and trust at the highest level?
You know as well as I do, Shaun, I've worked in some secure places, and my background is Czech Foley. And I mean Czech Foley, my mum and dad, your nan and granddad. It goes back years upon years, and they will pull you to bits left, right and centre. Now, the horrific thing for me is that Jimmy Savile had his own room in Clarence House. Now, Prince Charles and Lady Diana trusted him, as well as the Queen, as well as the other known Andrew, who's currently under investigation. But he had his own flat, and the power that he had was he could sack Prince Charles and Lady Diana's staff, which he has done. They trusted him to the extent that they could sit down and have a conversation about their marriage. He was seen as, by them as well, a demigod. No, Jimmy can't do no wrong. You know what I mean? It's horrific to think that man was round the children or round the future king. You know what I mean? There's no story there that suggests anything went on, but if given a chance.
Do you think that there's a degree of looking the other way? Because if Prince Charles's mentor was Lord Mountbatten, who had a history of that activity, do you think there's like an acceptability factor whereby it's not that a big deal to them? I mean, if they've done the background checks on him and they've discovered this stuff.
I'm going to say, in them days, I mean, what we've got to understand is we're living in an age now where nothing is acceptable. Okay, and it should never have been acceptable anyway. But you're going back to a time in the 70s when, you know, somebody on top of the pops will touch somebody's leg or backside or whatever.
Have you seen the clip of Savile doing that?
I've seen it many a times. You see him on Jim Will Fix It when he's got his arms around the girls, and you can see where the hands are going. But you're talking about the 70s, 60s, when women were treated slightly different to what they are now. They wasn't expected, they were expected to keep quiet. Not just Savile, you're talking about, as you rightly say, Lord Mountbatten. There's history in a royal family of certain things going on. You could go back to Jack the Ripper. Was a part of the royal family involved in that? There's a lot of secrets there hidden that we'll never know about. Thatcher, they all, whether Prince Charles knew what was going on, I don't know. I can't answer that, and I can't answer whether Princess Diana knew. You know what I mean? They just see a mask, and what was hidden behind the mask was quite horrific.
So there are allegations of care home kids getting pimped out from that era.
Yeah.
Do you have any information about Savile being a participant in that?
Savile was what I would call the kingpin. He was the person that would be sitting at the top, and A wanted a boy, so let's go to Savile. He can supply a boy of whatever age or a girl of whatever age. And it was known, and it is known, that Savile pimped out youngsters. What you've got to take into account as well is if you're a young lad or a young girl and you see Jimmy Savile, oh, he's famous, here's my route to fame. Okay, they could promise you the world and all the rest of it, and all of a sudden they're around the back butt raping you, you know what I mean? He was prolific.
So David Icke, many years ago, said that Savile got away with his crimes and had access to such powerful people and royal people because he was a procurer. So that ties into exactly what you just said. You think that David Icke was correct in that?
Yeah, I think David. I mean, I'm not. I'll be honest. I'm not a lover of David Icke. Some things he says are right. Some things I pretend to disagree with. But this time he's spot on. He's absolutely spot on. I mean, you've got to take the. I don't know if you remember an interview years ago with John Lydon.
Oh, Johnny Rotten.
Yeah, Johnny Rotten. He gave an interview that around about 1978. He was banned from the BBC because he outed Jimmy Savile.
They won't put him on top of the pops.
Exactly. Now, if Johnny Rotten knows, I mean, he's an intelligent man. I mean, don't get me wrong, but if Johnny Rotten knows and spilling the beans, if David Icke's spilling the beans, that tells you something. There's a major cover-ups going from the royal family right the way down to the CPS. They hide it.
What do you think of his Louis Theroux appearance? And earlier on you said that if Savile was here now, he would charm us. Yeah. Do you think that is a case of what happened with Louis, and Louis was blindsided?
Yes. Louis admitted that he was actually taken in. It's a shame, really, because, I mean, you see some of Louis' stuff and it's fantastic stuff he does. I mean, I sat and watched that when it first came out and didn't have an inkling, like everyone. And then in 2012 or 2011, when it first came out, I mean, Louis spent, I think, a week with Jimmy in his flat in Roundhay. He travelled around with him on 2 occasions on that programme. Savile nearly got caught out. When they were driving in the car and they're talking about paedophilia. And Jimmy says, I'll let people think what they want. Now, either I am or I'm not. And it was a big clue then, but he was definitely blindsided. I mean, I feel sorry for the guy but in a second, but he put another program out and said that he was blinded.
What happened on the BBC? This Is Your Life, 1998.
Well, he had 2 appearances. The first one was with Eamon Andrews. Not much came of that, but in 1998, what happened was there was one mention of, I think it was Michael Aspel at the time, with the Red Book, turned around and said, but all the little girls, Jimmy, and all the rest of it. And you can see Jimmy's face going, oh, no, forget that bit. And you look back on it, we all use hindsight, but if you look at that closely, the clue's there. Well, it weren't till the end of 98 that he was thrown out of the BBC. So he's had This Is Your Life on the BBC, and then he's been thrown out the same year.
So how complicit were the BBC in enabling him?
Right, I'm going to be totally honest here. I've got stacks of notes, which I'm always making notes when I'm indoors. You know, I've got my purple pen out and I'm forever writing. And it was in 1999 that a guy called Sir Roger Jones decided that Jimmy Savile shall not have entrance to the BBC ever again. He was questioned on a programme by Mark Williams Thomas, the ex-detective.
Yeah, we've got him on this documentary.
Yeah. And Mark Williams Thomas asked him the question, did you know at the time? He didn't give a straight answer. But for him to turn around and in 1999 turn around and say, no, we don't want Savile in here, that tells you something straight away. Then we go back to children in need. The reason I bring up children in need is because someone in the BBC wanted Savile on children in need. And the hierarchy at the BBC said, no, we can't have him in charge of children in need. Never gave a reason. You know, turned around and said, no, we just can't have him. Esther Anson said, and she quoted on a couple of occasions, in a funny way, we colluded with him. Now, when you have Mark Williams Thomas on, he will tell you that. What's a funny way about we colluded him? Why would you turn around and say in a funny way, you know, it sounds like you did collude with him, you knew what was going on. A couple of years later, she's starting up Childline. She said it's very painful and distressing. For who? For the people that are involved, or because you knew what was going on? We've made him into the Jimmy Savile who was untouchable. Now, there's 3 quotes there that Esther's come out with that tell me that she knew what was going on. Her husband, Desmond Wilcox, who was a filmmaker at the time, but was also in charge of the BBC, her husband, the clues are there. In a funny sort of way, we colluded with him. If I said to you in a funny sort of way, I colluded with you, you go, oh. It makes you sort of, like Christopher said, you could be, you feel as though you're involved.
What was Edwina Curry's role in all this?
Oh, funny story. Me and Christopher had a chat on the way up in the car, and he met Edwina Curry on a couple of occasions and turned around and told me a few stories about her. Quite aloof. I won't use the words, but anyway, Edwina Curry was in charge of Department of Health, because bear in mind, Broadmoor didn't come a part of the NHS till 2002. It was under the Department of Health. Edwina Curry, in those years, had encouraged the people at Broadmoor that Savile should be in charge. This is a lady who's helped running the country, and she's now put a lunatic in charge of an asylum. He's got a set of gold keys. He comes and goes as he pleases. He has a massive palatial caravan in the grounds. He gets his gold-plated Rolls Royce serviced by the mechanics there. Not just that, his Hustler mobile home, it's called the Hustler, serviced at Broadmoor. All under the noses of everyone. And Edwina Curry, blindsided, as well as Thatcher, blindsided by this utter loon and psychopath, to run a psychiatric hospital. It's you could say, it's another one of his sweet shops. Because that's the impression I get. Savile only used these as sweet shops, and you got to remember, he hopped from Broadmoor, then they pop up to Petworth, then they go over to Stoke Mandeville, then they go down to Bristol, they pop up to Liverpool or Manchester. There's 40 hospitals that this man had been known to tour around and have his way.
Wow. I've got one more question on your list, and then I think James has got some questions for you. But I'll give you this question first. How many missed chances to prosecute him were there over his 50-year reign of abuse?
Well, if we start back in the 50s, there was 2 missed there straight away. Then you're talking the 60s, there was 4 missed there. 4 missed chances. Police. There was missed chances at Duncroft School originally. There was one 14-year-old at Broadmoor that went squealing, rightfully so, to the warders and nurses that was told to, it's Jimmy Savile, forget about it. There were 8 cases at Broadmoor in total. There were 40 hospitals that this guy managed to get into, from children's hospitals. There are numerous accounts of how he could have been caught. And to top it off, his own barrister turned around and said to the Mirror newspaper, well, we know he did it. That is his own barrister that was going to defend him in one case, because the Mirror outed him a long time before he died, and they were told to drop it because it's Jimmy Savile, you won't get in it, you know. And his own barrister turned around and said, we can't touch him. We know he did it, but we can't touch him. It's power, it's money. You're talking about the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher at the time. She sent him a letter buttering him up, giving him the biggest arse kissing he's ever had. Pope John Paul II, a papal knighthood, recommended by Basil Hume. You then have, I'm going to bring up Keir Starmer, because round about 98 he was in charge of the CPS. It could have been round about, it might have been a bit later. He even apologised after Savile died and said, I'm sorry we didn't take the chance. Now, the only reason he didn't take the chances is because if he went to court and he was found not guilty, Starmer's arse is kicked, he's out of a job. He don't get his knighthood. But he gets his knighthood for failure. Like everyone else has got that knighthood. People get knighthood and rewarded for failure. The people at Broadmoor have got rewarded for failure. They've been put in some high jobs. If I failed, I get me arse kicked. If you fail, Shaun, you get a big kicking over it. The same as everyone else in this room. If we fail or balled up, but if you're in power and you've got money, you will get the biggest arse lick from the establishment that you've ever got.
So we've seen a parallel with this celebrity association then, whereby Epstein had pictures of like himself with the Clintons plastered all over the place, and Savile had pictures of him with Elvis Presley, the Beatles.
Yeah.
These pictures were duplicated and put throughout various of his locations.
Barbara Bush, that was another one. She had time with him.
So the purpose of these pictures is what?
Well, ego. It is purely for ego. I don't know if you ever watched, years and years ago, you had The Only Fools and Horses Miami twice, and Del sitting in his villa, and he looks round and he sees his doppelganger with pictures of the Pope, Madonna, blah blah blah. Ego trip.
And do you think these pictures were used to dazzle potential victims?
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, if you're young, you're vulnerable. Okay, if you're a 14-year-old girl or 16-year-old girl going to the top of the pops, and you're standing next to the white-haired face of the BBC, who's probably been and done it all, and you're thinking, oh, if I get in with him, he's going to make me a star, I'm going to end up making a lot of money, and in reality, you're going to end up making sod all, because all this guy wants you for is a quick fling and a fiddle, get you out of the door, and if you say anything, I'm going to ruin your life. He said he's going to ruin the amount of times he said it to people, I'm going to ruin your life. If I will make you famous. But he didn't mean famous as in, I'm going to put you on telly. It might make you famous as in, you ruin me, I'll ruin you. He'd done that to everyone. He had a book with telephone numbers like Tony Blair's in there. Donald, whatever his name is, I can't come back to him in a minute. You're talking Prince Charles, and you're talking, it was Lady Diana. Then you're talking all these little cronies like Rolf Harris, Max Clifford. He could walk about with a nomination. He could get on a train and people would just wave at him and leave him. But they weren't good enough for him.
What about the case of the teenager who he got pregnant?
Yeah, there is an alleged rumour. I'm saying alleged rumour. There is a rumour going around that he actually fathered a child. But the young girl that had the child didn't want to know. It's been kept quiet. It's been hushed. I put it down to money.
So there was an abortion there then?
There are rumours that he has a child about.
Oh, there's that as well.
Yeah,
okay.
there is a rumour that he has a child about. I mean, he would pay money to keep people quiet, but there is a rumour. I mean, I don't go much on it. I mean, it either is or it isn't. It's not.
What have you got, James?
Yeah, so a couple of questions. Have you come across the Claire McAlpine case with the BBC? 1971, there was a girl who wrote a diary. She was a dancer on Top of the Pops. And
Is that something to do with Pan's People or something, was it?
well, she wrote a diary, and she had been going out with a world famous singer, and she ended up, her mum found the diary, and then she went to the BBC to complain. Big fuss was kicked up, got in the papers, and the girl committed suicide.
Yeah,
She was
that
15 years old. Came up later with Tony Blackburn being sacked by the BBC.
Yeah, there was. I mean, strange enough, I was watching the other night. This Is Your Life, and Tony Blackburn came on, and I was thinking to myself, he knew, and he kept quiet. The young lady that committed suicide. I mean, it's the diary that was actually contained quite a lot of abuse in it, as far as I was aware. What I've heard, I've not actually read bits or anything like that. A lot of it was brushed under the carpet. A lot of it, and nothing. I mean, it weren't until 1999 that the BBC turned around and said Savile needs to go. You know, I mean, that you got to remember, in '71, he's a darling of the BBC. He can't do no wrong.
So there was lots of inquiries after the exposure programme to Jimmy Savile. So the hospitals, the BBC, the police, everyone had these inquiries. Do you think they were just a waste of time and money?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. When you look at these inquiries, and I've seen a 148-page report on Broadmoor, and the first 10 pages this is Appendix A, Appendix B. It's like 10 pages of nothing. And then it gets down to the last 10 pages of, well, at the time, we were lived in a different era. We could get away with touching someone up the backside. They actually turned around and basically said, well, it's acceptable. No one's ever been brought to account for it. We just write a report and just brush it under the carpet. I mean, me and Christopher has put in FOI reports to Broadmoor Hospital. on every occasion they've fobbed us off. You know, they've come back and said, NHS or the NHS. Well, what do you mean? You're NHS. No, we're two different. We're the NHS or NHS. So all they do is the reports do nothing. You know, I'm if I can find a report that's going to turn around and tell me, but there's 40 hospitals that he went round. Each hospital has got a 100-odd page report. The BBC, funded by the likes of me, you, and you, have just, we'll just do a report, keep them sweet, and hide it, because that's how they do. Governments are saying they'll hide it, they won't come forward and turn around and declare they made a mistake. Broadmoor won't come declare they made a mistake. BBC will definitely not, but they will expect you to pay their money.
Do you think he was an absolutely unique character, and will we ever see his life again?
Well, you mentioned Epstein and a few others that sort of come to mind for me, but I don't think anyone will ever touch what the crime and the sheer want of rape, or whatever you want to call it. I don't think anyone will ever, or should be able to, be allowed to get away with that. I mean, we're in an age now where, if I touch someone, it gets bang, it's out straight away. And that's the way it should be. It's just, the BBC used a massive brush on a big bit of carpet. The NHS now used a big brush on a big bit of carpet, because they just want it out of the way.
I mean, I actually said coming up here, and I've now lost my time. In America, you've got to remember, this is America with Epstein. In America, the age for consent is a lot later than in the UK. A lot later in the UK. So Epstein was, despite the filthy man he was interfering with girls or playing with girls in this country that would have been the legal age. He doesn't hold a candle to what this man's done, this Savile. And I said to him, I had to walk out of this now, because I couldn't take in what he was telling me. That's how bad it was. I mean, I got outside and I felt ill. And what it is I said to him, this man is the worst sexual psychopath this world's ever known.
I think perhaps would at the end of the podcast, maybe if you could sit there and say that to the camera, we could put you in.
I've never, ever felt the way he put that across, his tone of voice, his grasp of his subject, moved me almost.
Yeah,
I had to go outside.
We're all totally gripped by what you're saying, Boris. Is there anything else that I've missed out that you'd like to say?
Oh, Shaun, I could probably sit here and talk about his PA, who knew Miss Cope, who spent 30 years with him and claimed that she knew nothing. Mark Williams Thomas interviewed her, and that claim don't wash for me, because you don't spend 30 years with someone and not know what's going on, especially if you're a PA. And then she said, I didn't know where he was from day to day. Well, if I've got a PA, I'd like my PA to turn around and say to me, you're here tomorrow, you're doing that, or I know where you are. Not her. She literally brushed over it. Janet Cope was her name. I mean, the fact that, the phone book that had so many names and connections in it. The book's there. It's been seen. It's horrific to think that 50 odd years that this man had free reign of the government, the NHS, the BBC, who were respected in 1940 because they were the voice of the British people and well respected by the people, that he managed to walk into every walk of life and destroy thousands of people, life is beyond me. I could probably sit and talk for hours about this man, and my specialist subject is Broadmoor, but this guy writing a chapter about Savile has just opened up probably the biggest can of worms that I've come across.
Well, we appreciate you coming in and sharing your information. So please support what Boris is doing. His book, Broadmoor Sinister, is coming out April 2nd, 2022. And if people want to follow you on socials or contact you, what links can we provide them?
We have BroadmoorSinister.com. We have Broadmoor Sinister Facebook page. And we have a Twitter account, Broadmoor Sinister, Instagram. Email addresses are all on my website. And there's a link to Christopher Berry D's website, which I am totally grateful for, because this guy, without him, I wouldn't be able to function, because he's just given me an inspiration.
And we are grateful to Christopher also for arranging this interview, and his links will be in the description box. And you can also check out the other work we've done with him on the True Crime podcast. So please let us know in the comments what you thought about today's interview. Huge thank you to the new subscribers. Subscription logos in the corner of the screen. And huge thank you to Boris for coming in today.
Thank you, Shaun.
We're doing one of them.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. So I'm here with Christopher Berry D, one of the most prolific and best-selling true crime authors in the world. He's gonna today tell us a little bit about Jimmy Savile. So what are your thoughts on Savile's 50-year reign of sexual predation with the complicity of the BBC?
I think Boris, in his incredible interview with you, nailed it in one. We're the taxpayers, we're the license payers. And for years, we've been conned and snowed by the BBC. We have sexual cover-ups from top to bottom. And everything that Boris said in his interview made me feel so sick that I had to go out of this interview and have a cigarette to calm down. Now, I've interviewed over 30 of the worst serial killers in the world. The very worst. Cannibals, necrophiliacs, the worst. In prisons around the world. And when we know that Jimmy Savile was going into the mortuaries and hospitals, shutting the door, dimming the lights, pulling a corpse out of a cupboard, laying it on a slab, and having sex with it. You're in the realms of Jeffrey Dahmer, Douglas Clark, the Sunset Slower I've interviewed, who wanted to open up a mortuary and have sex with the dead, with a girl that was at one time dating Kenneth Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler. You've got Dennis Nilsson, the London gay guy that was killing and having sex with dead bodies. If you had a Stephen King horror movie, even he could not imagine this long blonde-haired man gloating, his eyes coming out on stalks, smoking a big fat cigar, sidling into a mortuary and playing with dead children. How disgusting is that? And the BBC knew about it and they condoned it. And not one person, Shaun, has been held responsible. In fact, they've been promoted. They're given pensions. The BBC needs to get its arse into gear.
Who was more diabolical, Savile or Epstein?
The difference between Savile and Epstein is in America, the age of consent is a lot lower than it is in the UK. A disgusting man, of course, but look at the publicity that surrounded him and this woman, Ghislaine Maxwell. It's all over the news every day. There's court hearings. Everybody's going crazy about this man, Epstein, and of course, obviously playing around with one of our members of our own royal family, which, he's really cooperating with the FBI, isn't he? Hiding in Windsor Castle, wherever he sits, and his stupid little man. But what really gets up my nose is that we're not seeing anything about Savile, really. A couple of brilliant documentaries. But where's the public outrage like it is in America over Epstein? Why isn't there a public outrage against Keith Starmer, who should have prosecuted this man? And he's in charge of the Labour Party. So I think what Boris has brought out, God's grace to you for allowing him on, is something which the public ought to be absolutely furious about.
What Freedom of Information Acts have you tried to utilise to get information on Savile and Broadmoor?
Well, we already knew the answers, Boris and I. But I thought, well, let's give Broadmoor or the NHS a fair crack at the whip. We knew what the answers were. So I sent Broadmoor a FOI request. Now, by law, they should have responded to say they got it within 12 days, at maximum. Got about a month or so to come back and say, we can either help you or we can't help you, or there will be a fee. This is the FOI cross. This is British government law, not a peep. I redid it again after 2 months. Nothing. I rang the hospital. Nobody would answer. And eventually I got hold of a security guard who gave me a telephone number. Yes, sir, I think I've got somebody for you. I spoke to this woman. She said, I'll pass that on to our legal advisors. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you very much for contact. We'll do everything we can to help you. Nothing. Eventually, on my third FOI request, I actually sent a copy to Matt Hancock, the health secretary, because this refusal to answer these things, it is under his watch. Nothing. But the next day, the NHS attorneys emailed me. Oh, well, we're not part of the NHS as such, that hospital. It is the NHS, and we are NHS. And then I wrote back and said, well, that's legal bullshit, because, are you telling me that Broadmoor Hospital is not a public institution and they're not responsible for the freedom of information? And they come back with another lot of bullshit. And we already knew the answers. So you see the cover up, constantly covering up.
How rare are necrophiliacs, and what would have shaped Savile into that kind of behaviour? Would he be born with something wrong with his brain, or would it have been factors that happened throughout his life?
I think Boris summed it all up in a very matter-of-fact sort of way. He's not a professor. He's a Londoner, and he said it as it is. And with necrophilia, basically, especially a paedophile, he's got a young child or a young woman or a man, in case of Dharma, is helpless. It's completely and now we've got to remember that Savile was a control freak. He was an extreme narcissist. He was a control freak. He's a sexual predator. And so if he thought a young girl's laying on a mortuary slab or was a woman on a mortuary slab, it's like, again, as Boris said, a sweet shop. The mortuaries became sweet shops for him.
Do you think that the royals should have done more, exercise more scrutiny of his background rather than allow him to access the highest level of their circles?
I can tell you this, that if you try to get into a Category A prison today, you will have the most stringent security checks done, and then you still might not get in. Right? You're telling me that Prince Charles, with
MI5 and MI6 in his own security staff and own security team, and you've got Princess Di and she's got her entourage, and you've got the Queen and all this mixing about, and not one single one of them had the brains and the wits to think, let's do an in-depth security check on Mr. Savile before we let him in here, let alone him with 100 yards of this royal family. But no, they didn't. And that comes back to Mountbatten, and it's almost as if it's like, oh, well, don't worry about it.
No big deal to them. What have you got, James?
I just had those 3 questions from earlier. Maybe like something about have we learnt anything? Do you think society's moved on and learnt something from Savile, and there has been some sort of change in society to stop someone like Savile happening again?
The question asked is really, have we learned anything from Savile, and are we doing better today? I think is a good question. When the NHS refuse to answer these sort of questions, which are quite honest, sensible questions, why are they covering up now? What's going on behind Broadmoor walls now that we do not know about? What is held in secret these days? Who's at the BBC now, or any other institution, that hasn't been outed? So perhaps we've got a long way to go.
Anything you'd like to say in conclusion that you think that's been missed out?
Where's the gin and tonic? You come here in good faith.
Cheers. Thanks. Brilliant.